The first truck came up the gravel lane a little after 7 on a raw morning in the first week of October in the fall of 2019, and it did not slow at the house. It backed to the lip of the sloping backfield, the bed rose against a low gray sky, and the load came off in one long wet slide, tons of crushed grape pomace pouring down the raised bed and off the tailgate in a deep purple-red avalanche. Skins and seeds and broken stems sliding out across the frost-bitten grass, a sweet sour steam rising off the mass where it was already warm from the inside. The driver never climbed down from the cab. Before 8 there was a second truck, and behind it a third, and by noon a mound of spent grape stood taller than a man where the pasture used to be, on a 90-acre place on a Finger Lakes hillside that the county had already given up on. It steamed in the cold. It smelled of wine gone wrong and of something turning, a thick fermented sweetness that carried down the whole lane, and by afternoon the first flies had found it even in October. This was the leavings of the crush, the skins, the pips, the stems, the pulp a winery presses the juice out of and is left holding by the ton every harvest. You cannot sell it, you can barely feed it, and left in a heap it ferments and molds and sours within days into a hot, wet, stinking mess that only gets harder to move. By every measure anybody driving past that field had, it was garbage that was already going bad. The winery had pomace to be rid of. It ran a large operation across the lake, one of the big names that turned the region's grapes into bottled wine, and every October it pressed mountains of fruit and was left standing in a hillside of spent pomace that came off faster than anyone could haul it. Pomace is a disposal cost. It has to go somewhere before it rots, and the cheapest somewhere is a field with nobody left to object. An old free-tipping handshake, made years back with a man who had since passed, said the back slope of the Teague place would take it. So it came, 3 loads before noon, and the trucks turned around in the yard and left the way they came. Cars slowed on the road to look at the steaming purple mound, the way cars do, and every one of them arrived at the same thought, which was the only thought the pile seemed to allow. 40 tons of crushed fermenting grape waste dumped on a field that was already finished, belonging to a woman who was already finished. Why would anybody want that? If stories like this keep finding their way in front of you, this channel is worth sticking around for. Go ahead and subscribe and tell me where you're watching from tonight. Now back to the story. There is a woman in this story, and the first thing she did was the thing nobody expected. She did not call a lawyer. She did not call the county, and she did not call the winery, though a lawyer would tell her later that she had a clean trespass case and could have called all 3. She walked out to the pile that same afternoon with a canvas bag of the only tools she trusted: a handheld moisture meter, a refractometer, a fistful of pH strips, and a nested stack of test sieves. And she started measuring it. Her name was Marion Teague. She was 47 that fall, and by every measure the county kept, she was done. She had spent 22 years in the quality lab of a fruit processing plant down the valley, the small room off the line where every incoming load was read for sugar and acid and moisture and held or rejected on her numbers. Until the plant was bought, the lab was folded into a corporate 1-2 states away, and her job went with it. Her uncle had died that same spring and left her the 90 acres in the shape of everything else he left: a barn with a bowed ridgeline, a shed of seized machinery, a spring line that ran silty, and a note at the bank nobody had mentioned. So a woman who had spent her life measuring things inherited a farm nobody would measure, and a winery with too much pomace found a slope with nobody to say no. The county read it exactly the way it looked: the winery clearing its rot onto a written-off farm belonging to a written-off woman. And she would take it, because what else was a person like that going to do? But 22 years in a quality lab teaches you one thing all the way to the bone. And it is the thing this whole story turns on. Nothing that comes off a truck is one thing. A load is never a load. It is a mixture, always, of parts with different values and different fates, poured together and named for the cheapest and the worst of them. The only work that ever mattered, the work she had done 10 hours a day for 2 decades, was taking the mixture apart, measuring each part honestly, and refusing to let the whole be judged by its ugliest fraction. She did not weigh the pile. Weight was the winery's number, the disposal number, the number that made it garbage. Instead, she read it. The moisture meter buried its probe and came back high, dangerously high. The mass was wet enough to ferment, and it was already warm in the core. The refractometer still showed sugar in the pressed skins, which meant it would keep fermenting and heating until something stopped it. The pH was falling by the day as the sugar turned to acid and the acid toward vinegar. And when she ran shovelfuls over her nested sieves, the pile came apart into things. The hard little grape seeds on one screen, the leathery purple skins on the next, the woody stems above them, and a dark, fine pulp falling through to the bottom. 4 fractions off a single shovel, and the winery had thrown all 4 away under one word. She filled a labeled glass jar from each screen and set them in a row on the tailgate: seed, skin, stem, fines, and the mound behind her stopped being 40 tons of garbage and became 4 different things she did not yet have prices for. You do not price a load by the ton, she wrote at the top of the first notebook page. You price it by what is in it and by how fast it is turning. It was the sentence the whole business would eventually stand on. Emery Sable lived 2 miles up the ridge and had run a stone gristmill for the better part of 40 years, grinding cornmeal and buckwheat and whole wheat for every bakery and feed store in the valley, until the big roller mills undercut him to nothing and he chained the doors. He was 74. He came out on the 3rd day, not because she asked, but because he had driven past twice and could not help himself, and he stood at the foot of the steaming pile with his hands in his coat and looked at it the way an old man looks at something he has known his whole life and never expected to see in a heap. He crouched, took up a handful of the wet skins, and smelled it, and something moved across his face. He asked her if the middle of the pile was hot. She said the core read warm and climbing. He nodded like that was both the problem and the answer. It's cooking itself, he told her. Wet like that, with sugar still in it, it ferments and heats and molds from the inside, and moldy pomace will ruin anything you try to make from it. Spread it, dry it, get the water out before the water eats it. Then he rubbed a pinch of the dark skins between finger and thumb, looked at the purple stain it left, and looked at her. You'll do, he said. That first winter she went after the wrong thing, and she went after it with everything she had. She went after the oil. It made sense. Grapeseed oil was the part that looked like a product, the clean premium thing with a name people already knew, the bottle you could picture on a grocery shelf. She dried a batch of the seeds, screened them off from the skins, borrowed a small cold press meant for sunflower and canola, and started pressing. It fought her at every step. Grape seeds are small and hard and hold little oil, so the yield was a trickle for all the seed she fed it, and the press cake packed and glazed and stalled the auger. Worse, the oil she did bottle would not keep. Grapeseed oil is delicate, heavy in the fats that go rancid fastest, and without cold handling and light tight storage it oxidized in the bottle within weeks, turning flat and painty. She drove a case of it to a specialty grocer who had said they would take a look, and they took a look and sent it back, cloudy and turning. The oil was the part that looked like the business, and the part that fought her hardest. The second failure came out of trying to move the tonnage, and it cost more. If she could not press the pile away, she reasoned she would sell it whole, dry the pomace, press it into cakes, and sell it to the dairies up the road as a cattle supplement. The way spent brewery grain got fed. But she dried it wrong and rushed it. The cakes held moisture in their centers, and by the time they reached the first barn, they had molded and soured. Cattle will not touch sour cake, and mold in feed is a thing no dairyman forgives. The load came back, and a month of work and most of what little money there was came back with it. She stood in the shed at the end of it with a stalled press, a pallet of ruined cake, and a hillside of pomace she now understood she did not understand. That was the winter she nearly called the winery and told them to come haul it back. What turned it was the fraction she had been throwing away. All that winter, chasing the oil and then the cake, she had been screening the purple skins off the seeds and dumping them at the far end of the field as waste, one operation's garbage sifted down to a smaller garbage. It was Emery who stopped her. He came by in February, saw the growing heap of dried purple skin at the field edge, and asked her, quietly, what in the world she thought she was doing throwing that out. Because the skins, dried gently and milled fine, were grape skin flour. And grape skin flour was the one thing in that whole pile the food world could not easily get and could not fake. It is deep purple, almost black-red, and it carries in it everything the juice leaves behind: the color, the tannin, the antioxidants, the whisper of the fruit. Artisan bakeries wanted it to color and flavor bread and pasta without a drop of dye. A small natural cosmetics maker 2 towns over wanted it for the pigment and the antioxidants. A supplement blender wanted it milled to a guaranteed fineness. All of them had been making do with dull imported powders of no known grade, and here was a woman with 40 tons of the raw thing and a lab habit of proving exactly what was in it. The grapeseed oil she had bled over was a commodity anybody could buy by the drum. The skins she had been dumping were a specialty nobody had thought to dry, mill, and grade. "That's not your waste," Emery told her, standing over the heap of purple she had been building out of the best thing she owned. "That's the whole business. You've been throwing the color away." And a woman who had spent her life measuring things understood him at once. She had spent 9 days proving the pile was 4 fractions, then spent all winter trying to sell the 2 that looked like something. The value was inverted. The part that looked like the product was the commodity, and the part that looked like the garbage was the product. The only work between the 2 was work she already had in her hands. Dry it fast before it ferments. Mill it cold so the color and the antioxidants survive the grinding, sieve it to a grade she could put a number on, and keep it cold and dark so it never turned. So she built the thing backward from the way she had started. She spread the fresh pomace thin the hour it arrived and dried it low and fast before the sugar could turn. Because a wet pile was a rotting pile and a dry one was inventory. She separated the skins from the seeds, then milled the skins cold on Emery's old stone burrs run slow, because heat is what kills the color and the antioxidants, and cold milling was the one thing the imported powders never got. She sieved the flour to grade and screened out the coarse and the fibrous, and she packed it cold and dark and sealed against the air. And she measured every batch the way she had measured loads for 22 years. Moisture, color, fineness, the numbers written on the bag, because the one thing none of her buyers could get anywhere else was a supplier who could prove what was in the sack. She sold it the way she had graded it, honest, and to the people who actually knew what it was. She drove sample bags to the bakeries and the cosmetics maker and the supplement blender, and she told each of them exactly what it was and exactly what it was not. Not a dye, not a filler, a cold milled whole grape skin flour. This moisture, this fineness, this color, and here are the numbers if you want to see them. Emery told her she gave away too much by leading with the limits. It was the smartest thing she did. The one thing nobody in that trade can buy at any price is a supplier who tells you what is wrong with the batch before you find it yourself. The grape skin flour went first, and it went to people who came back for more. The seeds she stopped fighting and sold whole to an outfit that actually had the cold press to do them right. The stems she composted down into a clean soil the county's own gardeners started asking after. 4 fractions, 4 fates, and the fraction that had looked the most like garbage, the dark skin she had carted to the field edge to be rid of, was carrying the whole business on its back. In the spring of 2021, a truck came up the gravel lane, and it belonged to the winery, and the man who climbed down was their operations buyer. He had come, he said, because word had reached the winery that somebody on this hillside was moving pomace, drying it, milling it, selling it, running short of it, and he had driven over half not believing it. He did not recognize the field. He was a few sentences in before he understood that the spent grape his own winery had paid a hauler to dump on this exact slope. To be rid of it before it rotted was the thing the woman in front of him had turned into something the winery had thrown away every October for 30 years. By that autumn, the arrangement had turned the whole way over. The winery stopped dumping pomace on her and started selling it to her, fresh pressed off the crush, kept cold, called ahead, so she could dry it sound the hour it came instead of digging it moldy out of a heap in the rain. The operation that had used her field as a landfill became her supplier. And then, when its own tasting room started asking for a purple grape skin bread it could sell with its wine, it quietly became her customer too. The trucks still come up the lane. They stop at the shed now, and they keep the load cold. By 2022, there was a milling room in the old machine shed, a low-drying floor she built where the seized equipment had rusted, a cold, dark room of flour held to grade, 2 people on the payroll through the crush, and a small hand-painted sign at the end of the lane that said only the name of the place and the word skins. She kept the first notebook in the door of the truck, 9 days of moisture and sugar and pH and smudge pencil, the 4 glass jars still lined on a shelf in the shed. She never showed a buyer that notebook. She never threw it away. Most opportunity does not arrive looking like opportunity. It arrives looking like a mess somebody else paid good money to be rid of, tipped steaming in the one place where nobody important was watching, and the whole county drives past it at 50 miles an hour and agrees, without slowing down, that there is nothing there but rot. The pile does not argue. It sits there being exactly what it is, 4 things poured together and named for the worst of them, turning a little more sour every day, waiting on the single person willing to measure it instead of judge it. Marion Teague never out-argued anybody. She never sued, she never raised her voice, and she never told the town it was wrong about her. She got out a moisture meter and a stack of sieves and asked the pile the one question nobody else had bothered to ask, which was not what it weighed, but what it held. The color had been in it the whole time. Somewhere near you, right now, there is something written off, steaming in a heap, priced by the worst thing in it by people who never once took it apart. A load is never a load. Somebody has to go out there and measure it.